They said the cars were worthless. 6 months later, people would wish they had never laughed. The first truck arrived just after sunrise on a cold Monday morning. Then another. Then another. Ethan Walker stood outside his small garage on the edge of town, watching rust-covered vehicles roll through the gate one after another. The air smelled of oil, wet pavement, and old metal. Most people would have seen a graveyard of machines. Ethan saw something else. Across the lot, workers unloaded faded sedans, aging pickup trucks, and forgotten commercial vans. Scratches covered the paint. Dust coated the windows. Several tires were flat. A few engines no longer started. To nearly everyone involved, they were junk. "Where do you want these?" one driver called out. Ethan glanced across the crowded yard. "Line them up along the fence." "All of them. All of them." The driver shook his head and laughed. "You are going to need a bigger garage." Ethan smiled politely. "Maybe." By mid-morning, more than 20 vehicles filled the property. The collection came from Hayes Logistics, one of the largest transportation companies in the region. Their CEO, Victoria Hayes, had recently ordered a massive fleet upgrade. New vehicles were arriving. Old ones had to go. Most disposal companies refused to handle such a large volume for the budget she wanted. Ethan's garage accepted the contract. Many people thought he was desperate. In some ways, he was. Business had been slow for months. Bills continued arriving. Opportunities did not. Inside the office, 11-year-old Lily Walker sat finishing homework at a small desk beside the window. She looked up as another truck entered the yard. "That is the last one." Ethan laughed. "I hope so." Lily peeked outside. "They look pretty rough." "Some do. What are you going to do with them?" Ethan paused. The answer remained unclear even to him. Yet something about the vehicles bothered him. Not because they looked damaged, because they looked abandoned too quickly. "First," he said, "I am going to look at every single one." Lily smiled. "That means you have an idea." Ethan grinned. "Maybe." Late that afternoon, a black luxury SUV rolled into the lot. Employees immediately straightened their posture. The vehicle stopped near the office. A woman stepped out wearing a tailored business coat and carrying a tablet. Victoria Hayes. She surveyed the property with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to making difficult decisions every day. Her eyes moved across the rusted vehicles, then toward Ethan. "Mr. Walker?" "That is me." She extended her hand. "Victoria Hayes." Ethan shook it. "Nice to meet you." Victoria glanced around the garage. It was clean but modest. The building showed its age. Equipment had clearly been repaired multiple times rather than replaced. Nothing about the place suggested major success. "You accepted quite a challenge," she said. Ethan followed her gaze toward the vehicles. "I have seen worse." Victoria smiled faintly. "Most people would disagree. Most people are probably right." For a brief moment, she almost laughed. Then her professional expression returned. "As long as they are removed according to the agreement, we will be satisfied." Ethan nodded. "They will be." Victoria looked back at the fleet one final time. "Honestly, I think you are the only person who saw value in any of this." Ethan remained quiet. Wind pushed dry leaves across the pavement. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through town. Finally he answered. "Sometimes value hides under a lot of dust." Victoria glanced at him, unsure whether he was joking. Then she checked her watch. "Good luck, Mr. Walker." "Thank you." She returned to her SUV and drove away. As the vehicle disappeared beyond the gate, Ethan turned back toward the rows of abandoned cars. Evening sunlight stretched across the lot, painting long shadows between the vehicles. Everything became quiet. Lily stepped outside carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate. She handed one to her father. "So what do you really see?" Ethan studied the nearest truck, then the next, then the next. The same thought kept returning. These vehicles were not random. They were not ordinary junk. They shared something. A pattern. A possibility. He could not fully explain it yet. But after 20 years of working around machines, he trusted his instincts. "I think," Ethan said slowly, "someone threw away something much more valuable than they realize." Lily smiled. "I knew it." The fading sunlight reflected across cracked windshields and weathered paint. To the rest of the world, the lot looked full of forgotten mistakes. But standing there beside his daughter, Ethan Walker felt the first spark of an opportunity that might change everything. The next morning, Ethan Walker unlocked the garage before sunrise. Frost covered the grass beyond the fence. A pale orange glow stretched across the horizon. The town was still asleep, but Ethan had already been working for an hour. One by one, he moved between the vehicles parked across the lot. He opened hoods, checked serial numbers, examined engine components, recorded notes inside an old notebook stained with years of grease and hard work. Most mechanics would have looked at the fleet and seen scrap value. Ethan kept finding something different. Patterns, similar upgrades, specialized components, custom modifications hidden beneath layers of neglect. By 8 o'clock, Lily arrived carrying breakfast sandwiches and hot coffee. "You did not come inside last night." Ethan smiled. "I lost track of time. Again. Lily looked toward the rows of vehicles. "Did you find something?" Ethan closed the notebook slowly. "Maybe. That means yes." Ethan laughed. "You know me too well." They walked together toward an aging delivery van parked near the back fence. Its paint was faded. The tires were worn. Rust appeared along the wheel wells. It looked completely ordinary. Ethan tapped the side panel. "This van cost a fortune to build." Lily frowned. This one. He opened the hood. "Somebody upgraded nearly everything." Lily stared. "Then why throw it away?" Ethan looked across the yard. "That is the question." Throughout the week, he continued inspecting every vehicle. The deeper he looked, the more unusual the situation became. Nearly half the fleet contained expensive mechanical improvements. Many had lower mileage than expected. Several only required minor repairs. The vehicles were old, but they were far from worthless. Friday afternoon brought another surprise. Ethan received a call from a former colleague named Frank Dawson. Frank owned a repair shop across town and had heard about the contract. "I drove past your place," Frank said. "Looks like a junkyard." Ethan smiled. "That is what everyone keeps saying." "Because it is true." "Maybe." Frank laughed. "Tell me you are not planning to fix those things." Ethan glanced across the lot. "What if I am?" Silence followed. Then Frank burst out laughing. "You are serious." "Very." "Ethan, there is no money in those vehicles." Ethan remained calm. "I think there might be. You always were stubborn." That is one way to describe it. After the call ended, Ethan stood alone outside the garage. Cold wind moved through the rows of vehicles. Dry leaves scraped across the pavement. Frank was not the only person who thought he was making a mistake. Suppliers questioned him. Other mechanics questioned him. Even the bank had politely declined his recent request for additional credit. To everyone else, the numbers looked terrible, yet every instinct told him they were wrong. That evening, Victoria Hayes attended a logistics conference downtown. During a break between presentations, one of her executives approached carrying a tablet. "The garage owner still has all the vehicles." Victoria barely looked up. That was the agreement. Apparently, he is inspecting every one of them. Now she glanced over. "Why?" The executive shrugged. "Nobody knows." Victoria returned her attention to the conference materials. "It does not matter. You are probably right." Yet after the conversation ended, curiosity lingered unexpectedly. She remembered the way Ethan had looked at the fleet. Not like a man staring at junk, like a man studying a puzzle. The memory stayed with her longer than she cared to admit. Back at the garage, Ethan worked late into the night. A single lamp illuminated the workshop. Tools rested neatly along the walls. Old country music played softly through a small radio near the workbench. Lily sat nearby finishing school assignments. "Everybody thinks you are crazy," she said without looking up. Ethan smiled. "That happens sometimes." "Does it bother you?" He considered the question carefully. Outside, winter air pressed against the windows. The lot remained silent beneath the moonlight. "Not really." "Why not?" Ethan set down a wrench. "Because people usually judge things by what they can see immediately." Lily nodded. "And you do not." "I try not to." For several moments, neither spoke. Then Ethan walked toward the notebook lying open on his workbench. Page after page contained observations, measurements, and calculations. The picture was finally becoming clear. Not completely clear, but enough. He was beginning to understand why the fleet looked so unusual. More importantly, he was beginning to see an opportunity nobody else had recognized. A very large opportunity. Lily noticed the look in his eyes and smiled. "You figured something out." Ethan looked across the garage toward the dark silhouettes of the vehicles waiting outside. Then he nodded slowly. "I think somebody accidentally handed us a second chance." The wind rattled the garage door softly. Beyond it, rows of forgotten machines sat quietly beneath the stars. To everyone else, they were still junk cars. But Ethan Walker had started seeing the future hidden beneath the rust. By the following week, Ethan Walker had reached a conclusion that refused to leave his mind. The vehicles were never meant to become scrap. Somewhere between corporate decisions, accounting reports, and fleet replacement schedules, somebody had focused on age instead of value. That mistake created an opportunity. The question was whether anyone else would see it before he could act. Early Monday morning, Ethan spread dozens of pages across the office desk. Maintenance records, repair estimates, market reports, auction data. Lily sat nearby eating cereal before school. She watched her father circle numbers with a red marker. "You have that look again." Ethan smiled without looking up. "What look?" "The look that means you have not slept enough." "That is probably true." Lily laughed. "Did you figure it out?" Ethan leaned back in his chair. Sunlight streamed through the office window. Beyond the glass, rows of aging vehicles sat quietly beneath a cold blue sky. "I think I did." Lily waited. "Well," Ethan pointed toward a stack of files. "Most of these vehicles were customized for commercial use." "Is that important?" "Very." He flipped through another report. "Companies are paying huge money for reliable commercial vehicles right now." Lily frowned. "Then why did they get rid of them?" Ethan smiled. "Because large corporations replace entire fleets at once." Lily nodded slowly. "So they saw old vehicles." "Exactly." Ethan tapped the desk. "I see inventory." The difference sounded small. It was not. That afternoon, Ethan visited 3 local business owners. A florist, a plumbing contractor, a delivery company. He asked the same question at each stop. If affordable commercial vehicles became available, would they be interested? The answers surprised even him. Every owner expressed interest. Several expressed excitement. One asked how soon the vehicles might be ready. By evening, Ethan returned to the garage carrying something he had not felt in months. Confidence. Real confidence. As the sun lowered behind the trees, he walked slowly between the rows of vehicles. The air smelled of metal and possibility. Each truck, each van, each work vehicle represented potential, not individually. Together. That was the secret nobody else had noticed. Meanwhile, several miles away, Victoria Hay sat inside a glass-walled conference room reviewing quarterly reports. Fleet replacement costs appeared exactly where expected. Disposal expenses remained low. The entire project looked successful. Yet one line item caught her attention. The garage owner had not sold a single vehicle for scrap. Victoria frowned. She turned toward her operations director. "Why is everything still sitting there?" The director shrugged. "Maybe he is waiting for buyers." "For junk vehicles?" "That would be my guess." Victoria returned to the report. Yet curiosity returned again. The same curiosity she felt during her visit to the garage. Ethan Walker simply did not behave like someone managing scrap metal. He behaved like someone building something. Back at the garage, Ethan called a meeting with the only employee who still worked full-time alongside him. Frank Dawson arrived carrying coffee and skepticism. "This better be good." Ethan spread documents across a workbench. "Look at these numbers." Frank studied them, then studied them again. His expression slowly changed. "Wait." Ethan nodded. "Exactly." Frank grabbed another sheet. "These companies are buying refurbished fleet vehicles for that much? Every day." "You are serious." "Very." Silence filled the garage. Tools hung motionless along the walls. Wind rattled the large doors outside. Finally, Frank looked up. "This could actually work." Ethan smiled. "I know." For the first time, someone else saw it too. Not junk. Opportunity. Not scrap. Potential. Not a disposal contract. A business model. Later that night, after Lily finished homework, she found Ethan standing alone in the lot. Moonlight reflected across rusted hoods and dusty windshields. The vehicles seemed almost different now. Less like abandoned machines. More like unfinished projects waiting for a second chance. "You are smiling," Lily said. Ethan laughed softly. "Am I?" "You only smile like that when something good is happening." Ethan looked across the silent rows of vehicles, then toward the dark garage behind him, then toward his daughter. "I think we are standing in the middle of something important." Lily slipped her hands into her jacket pockets. "How important?" Ethan paused. The answer felt almost impossible to say out loud. Yet every calculation pointed the same direction. Every market report agreed. Every instinct confirmed it. "Important enough," he said quietly, "to change our lives if we get it right." The cold wind moved through the lot once more. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across town. And beneath the moonlit sky, hidden inside a collection of vehicles everyone else had already dismissed, Ethan Walker could finally see the outline of a million-dollar opportunity beginning to emerge. The moment Ethan Walker decided to move forward, the world began telling him why he should not. The first obstacle arrived from the bank. The second came from competitors. The third came from people who simply could not imagine a small-town garage owner seeing something they had missed. Yet Ethan had spent enough years rebuilding engines to understand an important truth. Just because something looked broken did not mean it had no future. On a cold Wednesday morning, he sat across from a loan officer reviewing paperwork. The office smelled faintly of coffee and fresh carpet. Sunlight filtered through large windows overlooking downtown. Ethan explained his plan carefully. Refurbish the fleet. Upgrade the best vehicles. Sell them to small businesses that needed affordable commercial transportation. The numbers made sense. The market demand existed. The opportunity was real. The loan officer listened politely. Then she folded her hands. Mr. Walker, I admire your optimism. Ethan immediately knew what was coming. But this proposal carries significant risk. Ethan nodded slowly. Everything carries risk. Not at this level. She pushed the documents back across the desk. I am sorry. 20 minutes later, Ethan walked outside carrying the same folder he brought in. The answer was no. The first major door had closed. Yet strangely, he did not feel defeated. The numbers still worked. The opportunity still existed. He simply needed another path forward. Later that afternoon, word began spreading through town. Mechanics talked. Suppliers talked. Business owners talked. Before long, nearly everyone knew about Ethan's plan. Most reactions sounded remarkably similar. He is rebuilding all those vehicles? That will never work. Too expensive. Too much risk. Too much inventory. Frank Dawson heard every version imaginable. By the end of the week, he stopped repeating them. Ethan already knew. One evening, while closing the garage, Frank leaned against a workbench and shook his head. People really enjoy doubting other people. Ethan smiled. It saves them from taking chances themselves. Frank laughed. That sounds wise. It sounds experienced. Outside, wind pushed clouds across a gray winter sky. The lot remained full of vehicles waiting for attention. To most observers, they looked exactly the same as the day they arrived. Ethan knew better. He had already identified the strongest candidates. He knew which engines could be restored efficiently. He knew which vehicles held the greatest value. More importantly, he knew where the demand existed. What he lacked was capital. Meanwhile, across town, Victoria Hayes attended a strategy meeting inside corporate headquarters. Executives discussed expansion plans, acquisitions, and quarterly goals. Everything moved quickly, efficiently, professionally. Near the end of the meeting, someone mentioned the old fleet disposal project. Apparently, that garage owner is trying to rebuild the vehicles. A few executives laughed. Victoria glanced up from her tablet. Rebuild them. That is what we heard. Another executive shook his head. He is wasting his time. Several people agreed. Victoria returned her attention to the report. Yet something about the conversation lingered. Ethan Walker never struck her as unrealistic. Stubborn perhaps. Determined certainly. But not foolish. The thought remained with her long after the meeting ended. Back at the garage, a different kind of support appeared. Lily Walker spent every afternoon helping however she could. She organized paperwork, cleaned work areas, sorted inventory. Most importantly, she believed. One evening, she found Ethan sitting alone in the office staring at financial projections. The room was quiet except for the ticking wall clock. Bad day? She asked. Ethan smiled faintly. Not the best. Lily sat across from him. Do you still think you are right? The question surprised him. Yes. Then why do you look worried? Ethan laughed softly. Sometimes children saw things adults missed. Because being right and making something work are not always the same thing. Lily considered that for a moment. Then she reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I made this. Ethan unfolded it. Across the page, written in careful handwriting, were 3 words. Keep going, Dad. Ethan stared at the note. The garage felt quiet. The winter light beyond the office window softened. For a moment, all the bank rejections and skeptical voices seemed very far away. You know, Lily said, every movie gets difficult before the good part. Ethan laughed. That is your business strategy? It seems solid. For the first time all day, he smiled genuinely. Outside, rows of forgotten vehicles waited beneath the fading evening sky. The bank did not believe. Competitors did not believe. Most of the town did not believe. But standing there with his daughter, Ethan realized something important. Sometimes one person who believes in you is enough to keep an impossible dream alive. And somewhere beyond the doubt, beyond the laughter, beyond the closed doors, the opportunity hidden inside those vehicles was still waiting. The breakthrough did not arrive with a celebration. It arrived with a phone call. Ethan Walker was replacing brake components on one of the fleet vans when his cell phone rang. The cold morning air filled the garage with the smell of metal and machine oil. Snow flurries drifted beyond the open service bay door. Ethan wiped his hands and answered. Walker Garage. A voice responded immediately. My name is Greg Turner. Frank Dawson gave me your number. Ethan glanced toward Frank across the shop floor. How can I help you? I own a regional plumbing company. Ethan listened carefully. I heard you might have commercial vans available soon. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. Then he smiled. You heard correctly. The conversation lasted nearly 30 minutes. By the time it ended, Ethan had scheduled an inspection for the following week. It was not a sale. Not yet. But it was interest. Real interest. The kind he had been waiting for. Across the garage, Lily looked up from organizing inventory records. Good news. Ethan nodded. Maybe. Lily laughed. That means yes. The following days became a blur of work. Ethan and Frank focused entirely on the strongest vehicle in the fleet. An aging delivery van with exceptional mechanical upgrades hidden beneath years of neglect. Every hour mattered. Every detail mattered. New brakes. Suspension repairs. Electrical work. Interior restoration. Fresh paint. The process demanded patience and precision. Some nights they worked until long after sunset. Other nights they stayed even later. Yet despite the exhaustion, something had changed. The project finally felt real. One evening, Lily walked through the garage carrying sandwiches. She stopped beside the van and stared. That cannot be the same vehicle. Ethan stepped back from his work and smiled. She was right. The transformation was remarkable. The faded exterior now gleamed beneath bright workshop lights. The cabin looked clean and professional. The engine ran smoothly. The vehicle no longer resembled something abandoned. It looked ready for a second life. Wow, Lily whispered. Ethan rested a hand on the roof. Everybody deserves a second chance. Lily smiled. Including vans? Especially vans. The following Tuesday, Greg Turner arrived for the inspection. His pickup truck rolled into the lot just after 9 o'clock. Ethan greeted him outside. Snow covered portions of the property. Cold wind moved across the open yard. Greg walked slowly around the restored van. He opened doors, checked compartments, examined maintenance records. Then he asked for a test drive. 20 minutes later, they returned. Greg climbed out smiling. This is impressive. Ethan remained calm. Inside, his heart raced. Thank you. Greg looked at the vehicle again. How many more can you do? Ethan blinked. Excuse me. How many more? The question hung in the air. Frank stopped working and looked over. Lily froze near the office window. Even the garage seemed quieter somehow. Ethan answered carefully. Several. Greg nodded. Good. He extended his hand. Because I want this one. Ethan shook it. The deal was not enormous. It would not make headlines. It would not change the industry overnight. Yet for Ethan, it meant everything. It was proof. Proof that the idea worked. Proof that the opportunity existed. Proof that all the skepticism had been wrong. Later that afternoon, Greg's payment cleared. Ethan sat alone in the office staring at the confirmation screen. The amount was larger than any repair invoice the garage had received in months. Across the room, Lily noticed the expression on his face. You sold it. Ethan nodded slowly. Lily jumped out of her chair and wrapped her arms around him. I knew it. Ethan laughed. For the first time in a very long time, the future looked brighter than the past. Meanwhile, at Hayes Logistics headquarters, Victoria Hayes reviewed a market report over lunch. A notification appeared from one of her operations managers. She opened the message casually, then paused. The restored vehicle from the disposal fleet had sold. Victoria read the message twice. Then a third time. Her eyebrows rose slightly. She remembered the garage owner. The quiet confidence. The strange comments about hidden value. Suddenly those conversations seemed different. She leaned back in her chair and stared through the office window. Somewhere beyond the city skyline, Ethan Walker was doing something nobody expected, something that should not have worked. Yet apparently it had. Back at the garage, the first empty space now sat visible in the lot where the restored van once stood. Most people would have seen one less vehicle. Ethan saw something else. Validation. Momentum. Possibility. As evening settled across town and snowflakes drifted gently beneath the fading sky, he walked through the remaining fleet. The vehicles no longer looked like abandoned mistakes. They looked like unfinished opportunities. And for the first time since the trucks delivered them weeks earlier, Ethan knew with certainty that the future he imagined was no longer just a dream. It had officially begun. Success has a strange way of changing the sound of people's voices. The same people who once laughed at Ethan Walker's plans suddenly began asking questions. The same suppliers who doubted him started returning phone calls faster. Even the local business community seemed more interested in what was happening inside the small garage at the edge of town. One successful sale had not made Ethan wealthy, but it had done something equally important. It had made people pay attention. 2 weeks after the first vehicle left the lot, another customer arrived. Then another. Then another. Word spread quietly through small business networks across the region. Affordable commercial vehicles were becoming harder to find. Yet somehow a single father running a modest garage kept producing them. Every completed vehicle carried the same reputation. Reliable, professional, fairly priced. Ethan refused to cut corners. If a component needed replacement, he replaced it. If a repair required extra time, he took the time. His goal was never to sell quickly. His goal was to earn trust. That decision changed everything. One snowy morning, the garage parking lot contained 3 prospective buyers at the same time. Frank Dawson stood beside Ethan watching the activity. "You realize this is getting ridiculous?" Ethan smiled. "In a good way?" "Definitely in a good way." Frank looked around. 6 months ago we were hoping people would show up." Ethan laughed softly. "I remember. Now they are scheduling appointments." The transformation felt almost unreal. Yet the evidence stood everywhere. Several vehicles had already been sold. More were being restored. Customer inquiries arrived daily. For the first time in years, the garage felt alive with momentum instead of survival. Inside the office, Lily organized customer files with surprising efficiency. "Dad." Ethan looked up. "Yes. There are too many folders for this cabinet." He smiled. "That is a good problem." Lily grinned. "I like good problems." Meanwhile, across town, Victoria Hayes found herself thinking about Ethan Walker more often than she expected. It annoyed her slightly. CEOs managed corporations. They did not spend time wondering about garage owners. Yet every new report seemed more interesting than the last. Another vehicle sold. Another customer order. Another successful restoration. During a leadership meeting, she finally asked a question. "How many vehicles are left?" One executive checked the latest update. "About half the original fleet." Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Already. Apparently demand is stronger than expected." Silence settled around the conference table. Nobody openly admitted it, but everyone understood what the numbers meant. The disposal project they considered routine had become something else entirely. Later that week, Victoria decided to see the situation herself. Her black SUV rolled into the garage lot just before noon. Snow reflected bright sunlight across the property. Several restored vehicles stood near the front entrance displaying small sales signs. The place looked different. Cleaner. Busier. More confident. Ethan noticed her arrival and walked over. "Ms. Hayes." Victoria stepped out of the vehicle. "Mr. Walker." She looked around carefully. Customers examined inventory. Employees moved between work areas. Activity filled every corner of the property. "You have been busy." Ethan smiled. "A little." Victoria approached one of the completed vans. The transformation impressed even her. The vehicle no longer resembled anything she remembered from the original fleet. "I underestimated you." Ethan appeared genuinely surprised by her honesty. "That happens." Victoria laughed softly. "Most people would enjoy hearing that admission more." "Maybe." He shrugged. "I am too busy working." For a moment, she simply stared at him. Most people spent enormous energy proving themselves right. Ethan seemed completely uninterested in victory. He only cared about the work itself. That realization stayed with her. Before leaving, Victoria walked slowly through the lot one final time. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of vision. Not luck, not coincidence. Vision. Ethan had seen value where everyone else saw waste. As her SUV disappeared down the road, Ethan returned to work. Another customer waited inside the office. Another vehicle needed attention. Another opportunity sat quietly beneath a layer of dust waiting to be uncovered. Later that evening, after the last customer left, Ethan stood beside Lily near the front gate. Snow-covered portions of the lot. Workshop lights glowed warmly behind them. Several empty spaces now marked where restored vehicles once stood. Lily noticed them immediately. The lot looked smaller. Ethan smiled. It does. Does that make you happy? Ethan looked across the property, then toward the garage, then toward his daughter. Not because the vehicles are gone. Then why? He rested a hand on her shoulder. Because every empty space means somebody received a second chance. The winter wind moved gently across the lot, and for the first time, even Ethan could feel the momentum building towards something much larger than a simple garage business. By early spring, the garage no longer felt like the struggling business Ethan Walker had inherited from years of hard work and stubborn determination. The transformation happened gradually, almost quietly, yet everyone who visited noticed it immediately. New customers arrived every week. Local business owners recommended him to friends. Delivery companies called asking about future inventory. What began as a risky idea was becoming a respected operation. Yet the most surprising change was not happening at the garage. It was happening inside the offices of Hayes Logistics. Victoria Hayes sat alone one evening reviewing industry reports when she noticed something unusual. Several small businesses that recently purchased refurbished commercial vehicles were reporting excellent results. Maintenance costs remained low. Reliability ratings were strong. Customer satisfaction was unusually high. She studied the reports again. The source appeared repeatedly. Walker Garage. Victoria leaned back in her chair and stared through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The lights below shimmered against the evening skyline. Months earlier, she had viewed Ethan as a hardworking mechanic trying to earn a living from discarded assets. Now the numbers suggested something very different. He was building a legitimate enterprise from opportunities everyone else ignored. The realization was difficult to dismiss. The following week, another unexpected opportunity arrived at Ethan's garage. A regional transportation company contacted him regarding a fleet modernization project. Unlike previous customers, this company was larger. Much larger. Their representative requested a meeting. Ethan sat across from the visitor inside the office while Lily organized paperwork nearby. The representative reviewed several files before finally speaking. "We have been watching your work." Ethan smiled politely. "I hope that is a good thing." "It is." The representative pointed toward the restored vehicles outside. "Your reputation is growing." Ethan glanced through the office window. Sunlight reflected across freshly restored vans lined neatly beside the building. The sight still felt unreal sometimes. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked. The representative smiled. "A long-term partnership." For a moment, the room became very quiet. Lily looked up immediately. Even Frank Dawson paused while walking past the office door. Ethan listened carefully as the proposal unfolded. The transportation company needed reliable refurbished vehicles on an ongoing basis. Not one purchase, not two, a continuing relationship. By the end of the meeting, Ethan understood the significance completely. This single agreement could generate more revenue than anything his garage had ever experienced. After the visitor left, Frank entered the office. "Did that just happen?" Ethan laughed softly. "I think it did." Frank shook his head. "Remember when people said you were crazy?" Ethan smiled. "I remember. I hope they remember too." Yet Ethan never seemed interested in proving anyone wrong. That puzzled people. Most would have celebrated. Most would have reminded doubters of every criticism. Ethan simply returned to work. Meanwhile, Victoria's curiosity finally overcame her caution. She arranged another visit to the garage, this time without announcing it beforehand. When she arrived, she found Ethan kneeling beside a vehicle explaining mechanical systems to Lily. The scene surprised her. There were no executives. No sales presentations. No signs of someone chasing recognition. Just a father sharing knowledge with his daughter. Victoria waited until they finished. Ethan stood and greeted her with the same calm professionalism as always. "Good afternoon." "Good afternoon, Mr. Walker." Victoria looked around the property. Several employees now worked alongside Frank. Customers moved through the lot. Freshly restored vehicles stood ready for delivery. Success surrounded the place. You build all this from those vehicles. Ethan glanced across the yard. The vehicles helped. Victoria folded her arms. Most people would be taking victory laps right now. Ethan laughed. I do not have time for victory laps. For the second time, she found herself smiling unexpectedly. The answer revealed more than any business report could. Ethan never focused on what others thought. He focused on what was possible. As evening approached and the day's work continued, Victoria walked slowly toward her vehicle. Before leaving, she turned back one final time. Ethan stood beside Lily reviewing plans for another restoration project. The setting sun cast long golden shadows across the lot. In that moment, Victoria finally understood what everyone else had missed. The real value was never hidden inside the vehicles alone. It was hidden inside the man who refused to see limitations where others saw only obstacles. And for the first time since this journey began, even the CEO who once dismissed the opportunity could feel something unexpected growing. Respect. Spring arrived quietly, but the changes happening at Walker Garage were impossible to ignore. What had once been a crowded yard filled with forgotten vehicles was now a growing business, attracting attention from across the state. Empty spaces appeared where restored vans and trucks once stood. New equipment arrived. Additional employees joined the team. And every week, another customer left satisfied. Yet the most remarkable transformation was not measured in revenue. It was measured in perception. People no longer spoke about Ethan Walker as a struggling garage owner. They spoke about him as a businessman with vision. One Friday afternoon, that reality became impossible to deny. Ethan had been invited to present at a regional small business conference. The event brought together entrepreneurs, investors, and industry leaders from across the region. Normally, Ethan avoided public attention whenever possible, but the transportation company partnership had generated significant interest. People wanted to understand how a single father with a small garage had built something extraordinary from assets everyone else dismissed. As he entered the conference center, he felt slightly out of place. Polished marble floors reflected bright lights overhead. Executives moved through the lobby carrying portfolios and laptops. Conversations about expansion strategies and investment opportunities filled the air. Ethan adjusted his jacket and smiled to himself. He still preferred the smell of motor oil and fresh paint. Meanwhile, seated near the front of the audience was Victoria Hayes. She had accepted an invitation to participate in one of the conference panels. When she saw Ethan's name on the schedule, curiosity convinced her to stay longer than planned. She wanted to hear what he would say. The presentation began simply. Ethan did not discuss profits first. He did not talk about success stories. Instead, he spoke about value. Most people focus on appearances, he told the audience. Businesses do it. Individuals do it. Entire industries do it. The room became quiet. Ethan continued. The problem is that appearances often hide potential. Several people nodded. Others took notes. Ethan shared examples from the restoration project. He described how overlooked assets could become opportunities, how patience often revealed value others missed, how second chances applied not only to people, but sometimes to businesses, ideas, and communities. As he spoke, something unexpected happened. The audience stopped seeing a mechanic. They started seeing a leader. Victoria noticed it immediately. The confidence, the clarity, the authenticity. Ethan was not delivering a rehearsed speech. He was sharing principles he actually lived by. When the presentation ended, the room erupted into applause. Not polite applause, genuine applause. Investors approached him. Business owners requested meetings. Industry representatives exchanged business cards. The attention felt overwhelming. Back at the garage, Lily watched portions of the event online through a live stream. When Ethan returned that evening, she ran toward him smiling. You were amazing. Ethan laughed. I talked about old vehicles. No. Lily shook her head. You talked about believing in things before everyone else does. Ethan looked at her carefully. Sometimes she understood the story better than he did. The following week brought another milestone. The transportation company finalized a major long-term agreement. The numbers were larger than anything Ethan had imagined when the first trucks delivered those forgotten vehicles months earlier. Frank stared at the contract and shook his head. Do you realize what this means? Ethan nodded slowly. I think so. No. Frank laughed. I do not think you do. The truth was becoming impossible to ignore. What started as a disposal contract had evolved into a thriving enterprise. The value generated from the original fleet now exceeded every expectation. Industry publications began mentioning Walker Garage. Business podcasts requested interviews. Local newspapers published feature stories. And everywhere the same question appeared. How did everyone miss what Ethan saw? One afternoon, Victoria visited the garage again. This time she stood beside Ethan, overlooking the property. The afternoon sun reflected across newly restored vehicles waiting for delivery. Employees moved efficiently between workstations. Customers arrived steadily. Success surrounded them. Victoria looked across the yard and smiled softly. You turned discarded assets into something extraordinary. Ethan followed her gaze. Then he shook his head. Not exactly. Victoria frowned. What do you mean? Ethan looked toward Lily, who was helping organize customer paperwork inside the office. Then toward Frank, laughing with one of the employees. Then across the business that now supported multiple families. The vehicles were only the beginning, he said. Victoria remained silent. For a moment, neither spoke. The wind moved gently through the property. Somewhere nearby, a delivery truck arrived. The garage continued operating around them. Then understanding finally appeared in Victoria's eyes. The greatest success had never been the vehicles themselves. It was the future built from believing they deserved another chance. And as she stood there looking across the thriving business, even the CEO who once considered them worthless could only admire what quiet determination had accomplished. By the time summer arrived, the transformation was complete. Walker Garage was no longer the small business people pitied when they drove past. It had become one of the most respected vehicle restoration and commercial fleet providers in the region. New buildings stood beside the original garage. Additional service bays remained busy throughout the day. Employees who once worried about finding steady work now had stable careers. Small business owners across multiple states depended on vehicles restored by Ethan Walker and his team. Yet despite everything that had changed, Ethan himself remained remarkably the same. Every morning, he still unlocked the garage before anyone else arrived. He still walked the property with a cup of coffee in hand. He still knew employees by name. And every afternoon, he still made time to sit with Lily. One evening, after the last customer had left, Ethan and Lily stood together near the front gate. Warm sunlight stretched across the property. The air carried the familiar scent of fresh paint, rubber, and machine oil. Lily looked around and smiled. Do you remember when all of this was full of those old vehicles? Ethan laughed softly. I remember every one of them. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had listened to everyone? Ethan looked across the busy garage. Workers finished their shifts. Customers drove away in restored vehicles. The business that once existed only in his imagination now stood before him. Sometimes, Lily waited for his answer. Ethan smiled. Then I remember that people can only see what they know. They cannot always see what is possible. A few days later, Hayes Logistics hosted a regional business appreciation event. Entrepreneurs, executives, and community leaders gathered inside a large convention center. Victoria Hayes personally invited Ethan and Lily to attend. During the evening, Victoria stepped onto the stage to address the audience. The room grew quiet. Hundreds of people listened. Victoria spoke about innovation, perseverance, and leadership. Then she paused. Her eyes moved toward Ethan. Several months ago, our company disposed of assets we believed had reached the end of their value. The audience listened carefully. One individual saw something different. Ethan immediately knew where the story was going. Victoria continued. While the rest of us saw limitations, he saw opportunity. While others saw risk, he saw potential. And while many doubted him, he remained focused on the work itself. The room became completely silent. Victoria smiled. Today, I would like to publicly thank Ethan Walker for teaching an entire industry an important lesson. Value is not always obvious. Sometimes it takes vision. Sometimes it takes courage. And sometimes it takes a single father who refuses to stop believing. Applause filled the room. Not polite applause. Not professional applause. Genuine respect. Ethan felt Lily squeeze his hand. For a moment, he said nothing. He simply listened. Months earlier, people laughed at the idea. Months earlier, those vehicles were considered worthless. Now an entire room stood in recognition of what had been built from them. Later that night, after the event ended, Ethan, Lily, and Victoria stood outside beneath a sky filled with stars. The city lights shimmered in the distance. Warm summer air replaced the cold winds that marked the beginning of their journey. Victoria smiled. You proved all of us wrong. Ethan shook his head gently. No. She looked surprised. Ethan glanced toward Lily, then toward the horizon. The vehicles already had value. Someone just needed to take the time to see it. Victoria nodded slowly. She understood. The lesson was never really about cars. It was about people, about second chances, about dignity, about looking beyond appearances. As the evening came to an end, Ethan and Lily returned home. The next morning, he unlocked the garage once again. Sunlight filled the lot. Employees arrived. Customers called. Another ordinary day began. Yet before stepping inside, Ethan paused for a moment. He looked across the property that had changed so many lives, including his own. Then he smiled quietly and walked forward. Because in the end, the greatest victory was never the money, the contracts, or the recognition. It was knowing that he stayed true to himself when nobody else believed. And if this story reminded you of the power of perseverance, quiet dignity, and second chances, share your thoughts below. Stories like these continue because people like you keep their lessons alive. And if you enjoy journeys that celebrate character, hope, and redemption, we would be honored to have you here for the next one.